So, Lone Rider here with a little more on the basket hilt sword, and just wanted to throw out there that it's coming along. You may notice the main difference now is that the basket hilt sword is actually a sword. It has a tempered steel blade on it. Uh, when I said I didn't think I had any more blades to hand, I misspoke. I was thinking in my head of blades that were ready-made for modification, blades that had essentially threaded tangs or screw-on pommels so as to be easily disassemblable. Of course, I had more than that to hand. I had this, and problem was this was peen construction, so I just ground off the peen, popped the pommel off, popped the grip off, popped the crossguard off. The crossguard and the pommel I'm saving. That it was a medieval style sword, and those are very nicely done crossguard and pommels. But the grip I'm using on this, so you can see in there, I just had to put a little nut as a spacer on the bottom because the handle here was slightly longer. And yeah, so I then rounded the end of the tang. I threaded it. Now for that I was going to go to a friend's house. A friend of mine has taps and dies and welding equipment and all kinds of stuff. In fact, so does another friend of mine who runs the local bike shop. The one dude wasn't home, and the guy who runs the bike shop, well, he's at work at his bike shop. So, because I work odd hours, I'm here. So I took myself to the hardware store, and I got one of these little things. This is for cutting thread, and this particular one was fairly inexpensive, and hopefully I'll be able to use it again if I have to. Now what I did, which was interesting, is I didn't want to go full hog and buy the thing with the two handles for turning it and all sorts of stuff. So what I did is I put the thing in the vise, and then I put the blade like this, and I just turned it. And it worked. So there you go. Now I haven't decided whether to thread the nut on and then peen it over, cut it off and then peen it over the nut, or just have two nuts, one like a lock, to lock the other in place, or just one nut with a lock washer. Ow, the blade is semi-sharp. Or what exactly? Obviously I'm going to try and have a pommel on there, so maybe if I can get, like a long, I forget what the term is, like a long nut with a recessed Allen key thing in the end that will fit inside the end of the pommel and clamp it down. We'll see. I'll see what I can do as far as that goes. But this is just temporarily put together with just a hex nut and then one of those little acorn nuts to cover the end, so the threads don't get mucked up until I decide what to do. What kind of pommel to put on there, or how to cut off the excess, or how to secure it permanently, whatever. Like I said, I'd like to keep it threaded so that if I decide to nix my homemade basket hilt at some point and put on a professionally made one, I can. On the other hand, it's kind of nice. I kind of like the fact that it's homemade, and especially after I clean it up, it's not going to look so bad. Which is another reason why I picked this blade. The hilt on this blade, originally, the medieval hilt, was pretty darn cool, but I never really liked how the blade handled, so I figured it's a good candidate for this. Also, when I did try and sharpen it, it only really ended up like semi-sharp, but there's a couple spots where I nicked the finish pretty bad, scratches and stuff. So I don't feel too bad, modifying this sort of thing. It's, I have to say, it's interesting. The point of balance is not as close to the hilt as I would have expected. Historically, these balanced much closer to the hilt, but then again, they also had many of them much more tapered blades. The blades, colloquially, the basket hilts were called broadswords, and some of them were as broad as a medieval blade, which is why I thought this was appropriate to use in terms of dimensions. It's roughly the right length, it's roughly the right width, but they did taper quite strongly from what I've heard. This has more of a basic taper and then, narrows down. And of course, like most budget blades, distal taper is not all that great. So Frankly, you know, it is what it is. It's a little more tip heavy, but then again, it also doesn't have a pommel on it either. So, and you know, the basket does. The basket does. You know, it's steel, but it's still pretty light. You know, so I don't know. We'll see. It's coming along though. I'm happy with it so far. Long Rider out.